Hey everybody, Mr. Gibson here. So for this assignment, you are doing the study guide for the Unit 3 test, and I'm giving you guys a couple of days to knock this out because it is a little bit long, but hopefully it being a little long is beneficial because it will really prepare you for the test, okay? So what I recommend doing is doing the study guide on your own before you finish this video. So if you have not done the study guide yet, pause the video, go do the study guide, and come back. Okay, so if you are watching beyond this point, I assume you've done the study guide and you are simply watching the video to make sure you got the questions correct. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I'll try to make this brief but also helpful. Okay, I don't want to overwhelm you with a super long video, but also don't want to just skim over stuff. So number 1 says describe the hierarchical structure of multicellular organisms from smallest to largest and provide an example of each starting with cells. Okay, so the lowest level of the hierarchy is an atom. Okay, it's the smallest particle that retains particular properties of an element. Okay, something that's larger than an atom is a molecule. Okay, molecule is just one or more atoms put together. Now, there are really small molecules. There are also like water and carbon dioxide, and there are also really big molecules, what we call macromolecules, like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, like your DNA and your RNA. And we're going to have a unit where we talk about those specifically, so I won't go into a ton of detail there. Now, things that are larger than a molecule, and these are different parts that make up a cell. They are all of the parts that function within the inside of cells. We call these organelles. Okay, so that's like your ribosome, your nucleus, your endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, all that stuff. Okay, now where does life begin? On what step of the hierarchy of life do we consider something to be alive? Well, it begins at cells, okay? Cells are where life begins. Actually, a prerequisite for something being considered a living thing is that it is made of at least one cell. You can have unicellular organisms, which the hierarchy would stop here, or like the question asks, you can have multicellular organisms, okay? So going from here, we need to give an example of each type on the hierarchy, okay? So I think what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to do this within the nervous system. So maybe a cell type in the nervous system is nerve cells or neurons, okay? So that's a type of cell, okay? When you have multiple cells together that work together for a specific function, we call that tissue, okay? Tissues are multiple cells working together, and an example of that within the nervous system, we could maybe say nerve tissue or brain tissue. I'm going to say nerve tissue. We're going to keep it simple, okay? And when you have multiple tissues that work together, that is called an organ, okay? So think of some organs that are made up of nerve tissue. You could have your brain, spinal cord, all those kinds of organs, okay? Now, when you have multiple organs working together for a common function, we call that an organ system or body system, okay? So in this case, it would be the nervous system, right? When you have multiple body systems working together in a multicellular organism, we call that an organism, and that is what you are. So for the example, let's just put a human. So there's an example of the hierarchy going from smallest to largest, from atom all the way up to organism, and from cells, tissues, organs, organ system, and organism, we have examples of what we would see within those levels of the hierarchy, okay? So let's move on down. Describe the function of the xylem. Well, if you remember, we talked about tissues in plants that have a specific function, and those two tissues are the xylem and the phloem. And if you remember, xylem is the tissue responsible for transporting water from the roots to the rest of the plant, okay? Xylem is the tissue that when the roots absorb water, that water is needed by every cell in that plant. So the xylem is the tissue that carries that water up through the rest of the plant. Now, what is the function of phloem? Phloem is the tissue responsible for transporting. It doesn't transport water instead. So what happens is the leaves of the plant are doing photosynthesis, and the whole purpose of photosynthesis is to use sunlight to make sugar, specifically glucose. Every cell in a plant, or really every cell in a multicellular organism for the most part, needs sugar. So in a plant, the leaves use photosynthesis to make glucose, to make that sugar, and then every other cell in the plant needs access to that. So the phloem is the tissue responsible for transporting glucose from the leaves to the rest of the plant. Okay, so the xylem moves water up through the rest of the plant, phloem moves sugar down through the rest of the plant. Okay. Number 4, name of the part of the body system that has functions for another body system. So sometimes we can kind of get it in our heads that we're talking about like an organ. We sometimes think, oh, that's only involved in that specific system. But really, we need to start thinking about how do these body systems interact? How do they overlap? Because organs sometimes can fit into more than one. So let's talk about the heart. Think about stereotypically what body system you think the heart would be involved in. Most of us would say it'd be in the circulatory system. It's what pumps the blood. It circulates the blood throughout the body. But how does it pump it? Well, your heart is a giant muscle that contracts to pump that blood. So guess what? The heart is also in the muscular system. Okay, so that's just an example. And if you have another one that is for both, that's fine too. But the heart is the first one that jumps to my head. So if you didn't have an example, this is one you could use. The heart is used both by the circulatory system. It functions within the circulatory system and within the muscular system. Okay. Number 5, the fight or flight response is an interaction between what body systems? Well, if you remember, fight or flight is when your body, or this works for most animals, you detect a threat. There's some kind of stimulus that tells your brain, hey, there's a threat. We are in imminent danger. And then your body will respond one of 2 ways. You will either run or you will fight whatever is threatening you. Okay. So when we go into fight or flight mode, we have certain body systems that are interacting. So one thing that interacts, the body system that interprets that threat is the nervous system. Okay, your sensory nerves detect whatever the threat is. They tell your brain, which is an organ in the nervous system, that there's a threat, and then your brain will tell your body how to respond. Okay, another big one is the muscular system. You can't run away if you don't have muscles. You can't fight away if you don't have muscles. Now, what are your muscles moving? They're moving your bones. They're moving the skeletal system. So these are just 3 things that that could be involved in fight or flight mode. Now, there are others. The circulatory system is involved because you've got to pump oxygen and glucose to your muscle cells so that they can move. Your heartbeat will increase when you're in fight or flight mode. And another one that is the endocrine system. Because when your body goes into fight or flight, your brain will tell you will start cranking out adrenaline, which is a hormone that tells your body to basically be on heightened alert. It makes your muscles on heightened alert. It tells your, like I said, your heart to start beating faster. So there's certain hormone response involved with fight or flight. And I could keep going, but I think this is pretty solid of just a list of body systems that are interacting when you are in fight or flight. Okay. What body systems interact to pump blood throughout the body? Well, you've got your circulatory system. Your circulatory system is what carries the blood, carries it to the lungs to pick up oxygen, because that's kind of the whole point, right, of the respiratory system, so that you can regulate oxygen coming in and then CO2 coming out. So your blood will pick up oxygen, and then it gets pumped to all of your muscles that need that oxygen in order to function. So that's the muscular system. Okay. And we could probably get more detailed than that, but I'm fine with that answer. Number 7, provide an example within a body system of the hierarchical structure within organisms. For the sake of time, I'm just going to reuse what I used up here. You've got nerve cells or neurons, make up nerve tissue, make up organs like your brain and your, not Brian, brain and your spinal cord, and those make up the body system itself, which is the nervous system. Okay. Describe an example of hierarchical structure within plants. Okay, so you have, maybe we just use a couple of different ones. So the xylem and the phloem transport water and sugar, respectively, so in that order, to the roots, stem, and leaves of the plant. So here you have individual tissues that are interacting to bring things to higher parts of the hierarchy. So roots, stems, leaves, those are organs of the plant. The root system is actually its own system. So there is just an example of a practical example of the hierarchy within plants. Number 9, what are the guard cells in the stomata responsible for? Well, if you remember, the stomata is a little hole on the bottom of leaves that regulate transpiration. I'm going to say gas exchange. Google wanted me to get fancy there and kind of auto-corrected to transpiration. But we're just going to call it gas exchange, so that which it's the same thing. Transpiration is gas exchange, but basically, like, it needs to bring CO2 in for photosynthesis. A byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen, so that needs to go out of the plant and into the atmosphere. That's good for us, right? Because we breathe that. Water, whenever there's an excess of water, it may evaporate and leave out through the stomata. So it's this little hole on the bottom of leaves that regulates this gas exchange. Now, sometimes gases need to go in and out. Sometimes we need to keep those in. So sometimes when, like, if a plant is responding to low water levels, you don't want water evaporating out of the stomata. So the guard cells are cells that open and close the stomata. So think of them as like guarding the stomata. When they want gases to go out, the guard cells they keep the stomata open, and when they want gases to not go out, then the guard cells will actually close up the stomata, and that closing up is actually what causes the leaf to kind of droop down, and it looks like it's wilting. Okay. Number 10, describe homeostasis. What kind of feedback mechanisms returns an organism to homeostasis? So homeostasis, think of it as internal balance in the body. Okay, so you've got all these different levels, like blood sugar, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate. You've got oxygen levels in the blood. You've got all these different levels, the amount of light that's coming in and out of your eyeball, all these different things, body temperature that need to be kept stable, blood pH, like the acidity of your blood. I could keep going. But all these different levels that need to be stable, they need to remain balanced in your body, or else you could get really sick or even die. So homeostasis is what we call those balance levels. And all of your body systems are working together to maintain homeostasis. Now, if there is some sort of outside stimulus, some sort of environmental factor that is throwing your body out of homeostasis, so let's say it's really hot outside or it's really cold outside, your body will respond by canceling out that stimulus. And that is through what's called negative feedback. So negative feedback returns an organism to homeostasis. Now, there is another kind of feedback that you've heard of, positive feedback. Positive feedback will take that stimulus and amplify it. So that's only used in certain scenarios, and it doesn't directly return the body back to homeostasis. Negative feedback does, and that's why it's much more common. Okay, number 11, what happens when a person's heart rate during exercise? How is this a feedback response? So during exercise, your muscles, muscles need more oxygen. Okay, they need oxygen to make energy, and we have a whole unit about how that works. So they need oxygen, and they actually need sugar as well to make energy. Well, I'll put sugar. Yeah, sure, why not? So your heart rate will increase to bring sugar and oxygen to your muscles faster. Okay, so your muscles are using up all the sugar and oxygen they have available to them, so your heart will start beating faster, and you'll start breathing more heavily so you can get more oxygen and more of that sugar to your muscles faster. It increases the rate at which your blood is flowing. Okay, this is a feedback response because it's maintaining homeostasis. It's maintaining normal levels of sugar and oxygen in the body. So it's actually a negative feedback response to maintain normal levels of sugar and oxygen in the muscles. Okay, so you are exercising, those levels start to get low, your heart rate increases so that oxygen and blood sugar can be brought faster, and so those levels go back up to normal. You had a stimulus that threw you out of balance, and then your body counteracted that stimulus and to bring it back to normal. And that's a textbook example of negative feedback. All right, number 12 says graph the relationship between blood glucose levels and the release of insulin. So let me show you how to do that. You're going to click where you want to draw. You're going to go to Insert. You're going to click Drawing, and you're going to hit New. Okay, and you're going to draw this. So this is very rudimentary here. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. So I got my y-axis, got my x-axis, and over here, I'm going to say these are the levels. And down here is going to be time. So these are the levels of glucose and insulin over time, okay? So I want to use, oops, didn't mean to do that. All right, so I want to do Scribble, which kind of just lets me free draw, and I am going to show you how this works. So let's say you had breakfast, you had something sweet for, let's say you had a donut. Your blood glucose is going to increase, right? Okay. Now, as your blood glucose increases, your, oops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. Your insulin is also going to increase. So let me do a new line here. And so your insulin is also going to increase as your blood glucose increases. Okay, I'm going to change the color of that so it stands out. So red is insulin, and we'll make black glucose. Okay, so glucose increased. Okay, so that glucose can get into your body cells, your pancreas will secrete insulin, and insulin tells all of your body cells, hey, all that glucose is in the blood, take it out of the blood. And so as glucose increases, the pancreas cranks out insulin. It's also going to go up. Now, as the insulin goes up, those cells are seeing that insulin, they're getting the message, and they're saying, okay, I need to take glucose out of the blood. So your blood glucose is actually going to go down. So go back to glucose here. If it will let me scribble. There we go. So glucose is going to go back down. Okay. Now, as glucose goes back down, you don't need all that insulin anymore. So your pancreas is going to stop secreting insulin, and therefore your insulin levels are also going to go back down. Okay, and I want to make that red to match. Okay, so there we go. There's our graph. As insulin goes up, or as glucose goes up, insulin goes up. As glucose goes back down, then insulin will eventually go back down. So that is the graphed relationship between glucose levels and insulin levels in the body. Number 13, why are negative feedback mechanisms more common than positive? Because negative feedback mechanisms return the body to homeostasis. They cancel out the stimulus that has thrown you out of homeostasis. Positive feedback will amplify a stimulus, it won't cancel it out. 14 says design a brief investigation to determine whether or not root growth in plants is a feedback response to an environmental stimulus. Okay, so to design this investigation, this really is kind of up to you, so it'd be weird for me to give you like a step-by-step answer, but you want to make sure that certain things are kept constant. Okay, so you need to pick a stimulus. The most important thing, or the think about roots when you're picking your stimulus. So what are roots' job? Their job is to absorb water. So your stimulus probably needs to involve water. In fact, it probably needs to involve the amount of water that the plant is getting. So let's say we had unlimited resources. Let's say we had all these plants. You could design an experiment in which you had multiple plants and you gave each one different amounts of water. And then you observe the root growth, or how much the roots had grown, depending on how much water that each plant had gotten. Okay, what's really important when you're designing this is you don't want to have any other variables. They want to all get the same amount of sunlight. Okay, the roots need to start at about the same length. So you want to eliminate all those other variables that could contribute to root growth. You don't want to like keep one in the dark and one in the light and say that water levels involved how those plants grew. That wouldn't make any sense, right? So when you're designing your experiment, it can be brief. It doesn't have to be like this big long paper, but it needs to involve water levels, and that needs to be the only variable. Okay. Number 15, how does the body regulate blood sugar? When it's through your pancreas. So when blood sugar is high, like you've just eaten, the pancreas will secrete insulin. Secrete. Insulin will lower your blood sugar. It tells your cells to bring sugar out of the blood. When blood sugar is low, the pancreas will secrete insulin's evil twin. And it's not really evil. It actually doesn't get as much recognition as it deserves. Insulin is always the famous one, but this guy, insulin will secrete glucagon, who's just as important as your insulin. Glucagon will raise your blood sugar. It will tell the organs that store blood sugar, like your liver specifically, hey, we need some more sugar in the blood. We're running a little low. Can you release some of that sugar that you've stored up? And so when the liver cells see that glucagon, they say, okay, I need to release some blood sugar or some sugar into the blood to increase blood sugar. Okay. How does the body respond to overheating? This one's almost too easy. Your body will sweat and sweat, gosh, I can't type, cools your body down through evaporation. So that sweat will evaporate off your skin. That's a net cooling process. It's overall cooling. And so you will cool down as your sweat evaporates. Number 17, how does a plant respond to decreased water levels in the environment? The simple answer is by wilting. But what causes it to wilt? So the guard cells will close the stomata to prevent water loss. So you don't want that water vapor coming out of the stomata, so the guard cells will close. And this looks like wilting. Okay. So number 18 says graph positive and negative feedback using real life examples for the units on graphs. All right, so let's do that. This is our last one. I'm going to try and do this really fast for you guys. So again, if you want to insert a drawing, pick where you want it to go, hit insert, hit drawing, hit new. So you probably remember from the CERs what these look like. So we're going to have lines. There's one line, there's my y-axis, there's my x-axis. Let's just do positive first. Okay, so the classic example for positive feedback is the number of contractions during labor. This is like during childbirth, okay? So, and that's always going to be over time. All right? So let's say a woman is pregnant. Before she goes into labor, her oxytocin levels, the number of contractions may be down here, okay? Or honestly, they should be at 0 because she's not having contractions until she goes into labor. Then once she has a contraction, so the number of contraction goes up, there is a chemical released called oxytocin that will tell the brain to cause more contractions. Okay, so contractions keep going up. And then as those contractions keep happening, more oxytocin is released, which keeps telling the brain to make even more contractions. So you can see in positive feedback, the stimulus is the contraction, and it keeps being amplified. You'll have more and more and more contractions until the baby is born, and then it levels off. Okay, so that's kind of a janky looking graph, but it gets the point across. Your positive feedback graph should look like this. You should have a sharp increase. So levels are normal down here, that shoots way up, and then they kind of level off at the top. So that is a classic example of positive feedback. Notice the purpose of that was not to return anybody to homeostasis. Okay, it didn't cancel out a stimulus. It took that stimulus and amplified it. Now, was it good that it did that? Yes, because you want to be able to have enough contractions to push the baby out so it can be born. But it doesn't necessarily directly return any levels to homeostasis. Okay, it's not really the purpose of positive feedback. Now, we need negative feedback, and you guys can probably think of a dozen examples of negative feedback. Okay, so if you have a different one than what I have, that's totally okay. So we need our y-axis, we need our x-axis, and let's just do body temperature, because that's just the easiest. It's what we're all familiar with. So body temp is on our y-axis, and then over time. So on your negative feedback graph, it's always important to know that you need to have some sort of normal level, okay? So there's our normal level. We would call that homeostasis. Now, what we're going to draw is what happens during negative feedback. So let's say it's hot, your body temperature increases. What's going to happen? You're going to start sweating. So your body temperature is going to go back to normal because it's cooling you off. Or maybe it's cold. Body temperature goes too low. And then you'll start shivering. You'll get goosebumps. So do all these things that your body will try to do to warm you back up to get your body temperature back up to normal. Okay, so in negative feedback, the graph looks different. You have a stimulus that throws you off of homeostasis, and it doesn't just keep going like in positive feedback. Rather, something will happen to counteract that stimulus, and it'll bring it back down to normal. And it always tries to hover around this normal level that we call homeostasis. Okay, so there's our positive feedback. Here's our negative feedback. You can label those if you want to. I mean, I can tell the difference just by looking, but if you want to label them, that's fine. If you guys need any help with any of this, I'm going to wrap up the video now. If you guys need any extra help or need anything explained a little bit further, I tried to go fast and not take up too much of your time with the video. So if I went too fast on something, you need extra help, please just let me know. You guys feel free to email me, okay? All right, guys, good luck finishing your study guide and good luck on your test.